Hi there, sweet ones. So we're up for the Themes Thursday again, and I couldn't just keep myself from going to ISIS now. I started with KEP last week, but I felt that although Nuit is the one that I should probably have gone to now, I was too eager to get to ISIS, so I hope you're in for a treat here. I haven't read it beforehand. As it comes to my own practice, I'm mainly experiential, you could say. I like to study and so on, but that's more of the, what can I say? I mean, it adds somewhat, and sometimes it actually distracts, but I think it's very interesting, and I love to do so for many reasons, not only for my own connections and practices, because they in themselves actually gives kind of enough. But so this is one that I have connected with quite recently, last years, I guess, and more so, not so much before. When I, in the beginning, in my connection with the path of goddess, you could say, as well as the god, Hathor was the one that I was more drawn to when it came to the Egyptian ones. Yeah. And later on also Bastet and Sekhmet. But Isis, she was rather revealed to me lately, and in a very strong way, though. Last years, all of these have been more clear and strong in their presence, and the things they've showed me nowadays than it was then. They were more vague to me then. But I won't go in so much to my own stuff. I will just read from Wikipedia to maybe learn something here. And also, I want to mention this. When it comes to these gods and goddesses, I mentioned this channel before, Makeda Wisdom. She also have a series on Ma'at, which also is super interesting, and I will get to her to come as well. But she also, in some video, I hope I find that video, so if I do, I will put a link to that, and if not, I will just put a link to her channel, Makeda Wisdom. In one video she talks about this, what do they call it now? No, not the whitening, but maybe that's the word, I don't recall actually, but how many of these actually originally were black, and then culturally they have been like polished, white polished sort of, and I think it's interesting, and so I'll put a link to her video on that. I should mention in some book she have or something. Anyways, I will just, I guess, start. I don't know if I should mention anything else. Lately, as I said, I've been in connection with her myself in a strong way, but she's also called the, what is she called? Queen of Magic, I guess, Goddess of Magic. We will come to that, I guess, in this text as well. Oh, I need the glasses, I realized. Luckily they were right here. And talking about magic, honestly, so many fascinating things just happens. They like fall on me, sort of things that I have just thought, just in my mind, briefly thought, oh, I want that, or I wish that, and it just comes to me, actually literally comes to me through the door. Luckily. And it's also interesting, the contrast, how things can seem not so great, and the contrast of that, how I discover so many amazing things related to magic now. That's why I mention it even right now, because I will have the not Rambly Friday, but Friends Friday, where I can ramble more. But it's really practical magic, and I see also those around me that we practice use the same tools for accomplish these things, and the same thing happens for them. So it's kind of interesting, really, in this manifesting things way, because I've usually not been concentrated on that so much before. So now, like, everything seemed to fall in my lap, and I kind of like it. It's surprising, though. Well. Yeah, and also I have a tiny little. Maybe I will show it in some video. I can, if I recall, I will show you for the Soul Saturday, when I will put a card, if I make a video then, if it's possible. Sometimes it mess up, but I have a tiny Isis necklace that I've had since I was like, I guess I like mid-20s maybe or something, and also an Ankh. I think that even is from before. I think that was one of my first necklaces even overall, because I never used those kinds of things before. And to me, although I didn't have that strong connection or like worship or whatever you should call it, her specifically, I was really interested. I'm so interested and curious in so many things, but they weren't only jewelry. They were like more sacred to me even from the beginning, although I didn't know what they meant. I think the Ankh also to me was like the key to life. I felt that there was something there that was very sacred. Yeah, I can say. So, but okay, now I talked for so long. So, and there is more text here on Isis, obviously. So, and also it's disturbing that they use that name now for those groups of Sunni Muslims, or whatever they should be called. I think many Muslims wouldn't call them that even, but I will just not think about that. But it's disturbing though that they use her name, or that the name of her is used. So it's good that people sometimes use Daesh instead, the name they don't like to be used for them. Alright. Isis, now I'll start to read about her, and let's see, maybe I will ramble a little bit in between. I will hope not. So, okay. And thank you anyone for being there. I don't know how to say this, but there may be someone out there who wonder if I know who they are, and yes, I do. I will just leave it at that. Isis was a major goddess in ancient Egyptian religion, whose worship spread throughout the Greco-Roman world. Isis was first mentioned in the Old Kingdom, 2686 to 2181 BCE, as one of the main characters of the Osiris myth, in which she resurrects her slain husband, the divine king Osiris, and produces and protects his heir Horus. I wonder if I didn't actually select a picture for this, but I will. We will see what that will be. I usually do that beforehand, so we will be surprised, all of us, what that could be. Okay. Maybe I mentioned something about that. I Google picture, so I'm in the text beneath then, if so. She was believed to help the dead enter the afterlife, as she had helped Osiris, and she was considered the divine mother of the pharaoh, who was likened to Horus. Her maternal aid was invoked in healing spells to benefit ordinary people. Originally, she played a limited role in royal rituals and temple rites, although she was more prominent in funerary practices and magical texts. In the first millennium BCE, Osiris and Isis became the most widely worshipped of Egyptian deities. Rulers in Egypt and its neighbor to the south, Nubia, began to build temples dedicated primarily to Isis, and her temple at Philae was the religious center for Egyptians and Nubians alike. She absorbed many traits from other deities, particularly Hathor. Oh, I just need to pause and cough for a second. Hathor, the preeminent goddess of earlier times. I didn't even know this actually. Isis' reputed magical powers was greater than that of all other gods, and she was said to protect the kingdom from its enemies, to govern the skies and the natural world, and to have power over fate itself. In the Hellenistic period, 323 to 30 BCE, when Egypt was ruled and settled by Greeks, Isis came to be worshipped by Greeks and Egyptians, along with a new god, Serapis, how you say. Their worship diffused into the wider Mediterranean world. Isis' Greek devotees ascribed to her traits taken from Greek gods, such as the invention of marriage and the protection of ships at sea, and she retained strong links with Egypt and other Egyptian deities who were popular in the Hellenistic world, such as Osiris and Harpocrates. As Hellenistic culture was absorbed by Rome in the 1st century BCE, the cult of Isis became a part of Roman religion. Her devotees were a small proportion of the Roman Empire's population, but her worship was found all across its territory. Her following developed distinctive festivals such as the Navicium Isaides, as well as initiation ceremonies resembling those of other Greco-Roman mystery cults. Some of her devotees said she encompassed all the other divine powers of the ancient world. Quite powerful she was. The worship of Isis was ended by the rise of Christianity in the 4th and 5th centuries CE. Her worship may have influenced some Christian beliefs and practice. It's not ended though, but anyways. Her worship may have influenced some Christian beliefs and practices such as the veneration of Mary, but the evidence for this influence is ambiguous and often controversial. Isis continues to appear in Western culture, particularly in esotericism and modern paganism, often as the personification of nature or the feminine aspect of divinity. Her names and origins. Whereas some Egyptian deities appeared in the late pre-dynastic period before about 3100 BCE, neither Isis nor her husband Osiris were clearly mentioned before the 5th dynasty, 2494 to 2345 BCE. An inscription that may refer to Isis dates to the reign of Nusir-ini during that period, and she appears prominently in the pyramid texts, which began to be written down at the end of the dynasty and whose content may have developed much earlier. Several passages in the pyramid texts link Isis with the region of the Nile Delta near Beit el-Hagar and Sebennytos. Sebennytos, I don't know. And she and her cult may have originated there. Many scholars have focused on Isis' name in trying to determine her origins. Her Egyptian name was, here I can't even see what it is, like a square and st, Azet, which gave rise to the Coptic form. Anyways, I won't even try to pronounce this other things here, or I don't know. and to the Greek name, which I can't say, I can't even read those letters, on which her modern name is based. The hieroglyphic name incorporates the sign for a throne, which Isis also wears on her head as a sign of her identity. The symbol serves as a phonogram, spelling that the ST sound in her name, but it may have also represented a link with actual thrones. The Egyptian term for a throne may have shared a common etymology with Isis' name, and Kurt Sethi, wherever, suggested she was originally a personification of thrones. Henry Frankfurt agreed, believing that the throne was considered the king's mother and thus goddess because of its power to make a man into a king. Other scholars such as Jürgen Osling and Klaus P. Kuhlmann have disputed this interpretation because of the similarities between Isis' name and the word for a throne, or lack of evidence that the throne was ever deified. Whatever her beginnings, Isis is closely connected with kingship in the pyramid texts, the earliest sources to describe her nature. Roles in Egypt. The cycle of myths surrounding Osiris' death and resurrection was first recorded in the pyramid texts and grew into the most elaborate and influential of all Egyptian myths. Isis plays a more active role in this myth than the other protagonists, so as it developed in literature from the New Kingdom, about 1550 to 1070 BCE. Easier to say it that way, but maybe I would say it in thousands. Anyway, to the Ptolemaic period, 305 to 30 BCE. She became the most complex literary character of all Egyptian deities. At the same time, she absorbed characteristics from many other goddesses, broadening her significance well beyond the Osiris myth. Isis is part of the Ennead of Heliopolis, a family of 9 gods descended from the creator god Atum or Ra. She and her siblings, Osiris, Set, and Nephthys, are the last generation of the Ennead, born to Keb, god of the earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky, which I will come back to her probably next time. I just skipped her now. It feels a little bit bad, but I was so drawn to read about Isis now. The creator god, the world's original ruler, passes down his authority through the male generations of the Ennead, so that Osiris becomes king. Isis, who is Osiris's wife as well as his sister, is his queen. Set kills Osiris and, in several versions of the story, dismembers his corpse. Isis and Nephthys, along with other deities such as Anubis, search for the pieces of their brother's body and reassemble it. Their efforts are the mythic prototype for mummification and other ancient Egyptian funerary practices. According to some texts, they must also protect Osiris's body from further desecration by Set or his servants. In this phase of the myth, Isis and Nephthys were often envisioned as kites. This form may be inspired by a similarity between the kites' calls and the cries of wailing women, or by a metaphor of likening the kites' search for carrion to the goddesses' search for their dead brother. Isis is the epitome of a mourning widow. Her and Nephthys' love and grief for their brother help restore him to life, as does Isis' recitation of magical spells. Various funerary texts contain speeches by Isis in which she expresses her sorrow at Osiris' death, her sexual desire for him, and even anger that he has left her. All these emotions play a part in his revival, as they are meant to stir him into action. Finally, Isis restores breath and life to Osiris's body and copulates with him, conceiving their son, Horus. From this point, Osiris lives on only in the the duat or underworld. But by producing a son and heir to avenge his death and carry out funerary rites for him, Isis has ensured that her husband will endure in the afterlife. Isis's role in afterlife beliefs was based on that in the myth. She helped to restore the souls of deceased humans to wholeness, as she had done for Osiris. Like other goddesses, such as Hathor, she also acted as a mother to the deceased, providing protection and nourishment. Thus, like Hathor, she sometimes took the form of Imentet, the goddess of the West, who welcomed the deceased soul into the afterlife as her child. But for much of Egyptian history, male deities like Osiris were believed to provide the regenerative powers, including sexual potency, that were crucial for rebirth. Isis merely assisted by stimulating this power. Feminine divine powers became more important in afterlife beliefs in the late New Kingdom. Various Ptolemaic funeral texts emphasize that Isis took the active role in Horus's conception by stimulating her inert husband. Some tomb decoration from the Roman period in Egypt depicts Isis in a central role in the afterlife. And a funerary text from that era suggests that women were thought able to join the retinue of Isis and Nephthys in the afterlife. Isis is treated as the mother of Horus even in the earliest copies of the pyramid texts, yet there are signs that Hathor was originally regarded as his mother. Hathor, yeah. And other traditions make an elder form of Horus the son of Nut and a sibling of Isis and Osiris. Isis may only have come to be Horus's mother as the Osiris myth took shape during the Old Kingdom, but through her relationship with him she came to be seen as the epitome of maternal devotion. In the developed form of the myth, Isis gives birth to Horus after a long pregnancy and a difficult labor in the papyrus thickets of the Nile Delta. As her child grows, she must protect him from Set and from many other hazards, snakes, scorpions, and simple illness. Her efforts to heal Horus are described in many magical healing spells, which identify each patient with Horus so he or she can benefit from Isis's efforts. In some texts, Isis travels among humans and must seek their help. According to one such story, 7 minor scorpion deities travel with and guard her. They take revenge on a wealthy woman who has refused to help Isis by stinging the woman's son, making it necessary for the goddess to heal the blameless child. Isis's reputation as a compassionate deity, willing to relieve a human suffering, contributed greatly to her appeal. Isis continues to assist her son when he challenges Set to claim the kingship that Set has usurped. Although mother and son are sometimes portrayed in conflict, as when Horus beheads Isis and she replaces her original head with that of a cow, an origin myth for the cow horn headdress that Isis wears. Isis's maternal aspect extended to other deities as well. The coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom around 2055 to 1650 BCE, say that the four sons of Horus, funerary deities who were thought to protect the internal organs of the deceased, were the offspring of Isis and the elder form of Horus. In the same era, Horus was syncretized with the fertility god Min, so Isis was regarded as Min's mother. A form of Min known as Kamotef, bull of his mother, who represented the cyclical regeneration of the gods and of kingship, was said to impregnate his mother to engender himself. Thus Isis was also regarded as Min's consort. The same ideology of kingship may lie behind a tradition found in a few texts that Horus raped Isis. Amun, the foremost Egyptian deity during the Middle and New Kingdoms, also took on the role of Kamotef, and when he was in this form, Isis often acted as his consort. Apis, a bull that was worshipped as a living god at Memphis, was said to be Isis' son, fathered by a form of Osiris known as Osiris Apis. The mother of each Apis bull was thus known as the Isis cow. A story in the Westcar Papyrus from the Middle Kingdom includes Isis among a group of goddesses who serve as midwives during the sorry, I got a cough again. So let's see. A story in the Westcar Papyrus from the Middle Kingdom includes Isis among a group of goddesses who serve as midwives during the delivery of 3 future kings. She serves a similar role in New Kingdom texts that describe the divinely ordained births of reigning pharaohs. In the Westcar Papyrus, Isis calls out the names of the 3 children as they are born. Barbara S. Lesko sees this story as a sign that Isis had the power to predict or influence future events, like other deities who presided over birth, such as Shai and Renenutet. Texts from much later times explicitly call Isis mistress of life, ruler of fate and destiny, and indicate she has control over Shai and Renenutet, just as other great gods like Amun were said to do in earlier eras of Egyptian history. By governing these deities, Isis determined the length and quality of human lives. Horus was equated with each living pharaoh, and Osiris with the pharaoh's deceased predecessors. Isis was therefore the mythological mother and wife of kings. In the pyramid texts, her primary importance to the king was one of the deities who protected and assisted him in the afterlife. Her prominence in royal ideology grew in the New Kingdom. Temple relief, however do you say that? Reliefs? I don't know, in Swedish I know what to say. From that time on, show the king nursing at Isis's breast. Her milk not only healed her child, but symbolized his divine right to rule. Royal ideology increasingly emphasized the importance of queens as earthly counterparts of the goddesses who served as wives to the pharaoh and mothers to his heirs. Initially, the most important of these goddesses was Hathor, a divine feminine counterpart of Ra and Horus, whose attributes in art were incorporated into queens' crowns. But because of her own mythological links with the queen... But because of her own mythological links with queenship, Isis too was given the same titles and regalia as human queens. Isis's role as protectress of Osiris against Set became a part of a larger, more warlike aspect of her character. New Kingdom funerary texts portray Isis in the bark of Ra as he sails through the underworld, acting as one of several deities who subdue Ra's archenemy Apep. Kings also called upon her apotropic power against human enemies. In her pausing again. Oh, let's see, where was I now? In her Ptolemaic temple of Philae, which lay near the frontier with the Nubian peoples who raided Egypt, she was described as the protectress of the entire nation, more effective in battle than millions of soldiers, supporting Ptolemaic kings and Roman emperors in their efforts to subdue Egypt's enemies. Goddess of magic and wisdom, Isis was also known for a magical power, which enabled her to revive Osiris and to protect and heal Horus, and for her cunning. By virtue of her magical knowledge, she was said to be more clever than a million gods. In several episodes in the New Kingdom story, the contendings of Horus and Set, Isis uses these abilities to outmaneuver Set during his conflict with her son. On one occasion, she transforms into a young woman who tells Set she is involved in an inheritance dispute similar to Set's usurpation of Osiris' crown. When Set calls this situation unjust, Isis taunts him, saying he has judged himself to be in the wrong. In later texts, she uses her powers of transformation to fight and destroy Set and his followers. Many stories about Isis appear as historialae, whatever that means, prologues to magical texts that describe mythic events related to the goal that the spell aims to accomplish. That may be what it means then. In one spell, Isis creates a snake that bites Ra, who is older and greater than she is, and makes him ill with its venom. She offers to cure Ra if he tells her his true secret name, a piece of knowledge that carries with it incomparable power. After much coercion, Ra tells her his name, which she passes on to Horus, bolstering his royal authority. The story may be meant as an origin story to explain why Isis's magical ability surpasses that of other gods, but because she uses magic to subdue Ra, the story seems to treat her as having such abilities even before learning his name. Maybe not all of them, though, before. Many of the roles Isis acquired gave her an important position in the sky. Passages in the pyramid text connect Isis closely with Sobdet, the goddess representing the star Sirius, whose relationship with her husband Sa, the constellation Orion, and their son Sopdu parallel Isis's relations with Osiris and Horus. Sirius, a heliacal rising just before the start of the Nile flood, gave Sopdet a close connection with the flood and the resulting growth of plants. Partly because of her relationship with Sopdet, Isis was also linked with the flood, which was sometimes equated with the tears she shed for Osiris. By Ptolemaic times, she was connected with rain, which Egyptian texts call a Nile in the sky, with the sun as the protector of Ra's bark, and with the moon possibly because she was linked with the Greek lunar goddess Artemis by a shared connection with an Egyptian fertility goddess Bastet. In hymns inscribed at Philae, she is called the Lady of Heaven, whose dominion over the sky parallels Osiris's rule over Duat and Horus's kingship on earth. In Ptolemaic times, Isis's sphere of influence could include the entire cosmos. As a deity that protected Egypt and endorsed its king, she had power over all nations, and as the provider of rain, she enlivened the natural world. The Philae hymn that initially calls her ruler of the sky goes on to expand her authority, so at its climax, her dominion encompasses the sky, earth, and Duat. It says her power over nature nourishes humans, the blessed, dead, and the gods. Other Greek language hymns from Ptolemaic Egypt call her the beautiful essence of all the gods. In the course of Egyptian history, many deities, major and minor, had been described in similar ground terms. Amun was most commonly described this way in the New Kingdom, whereas in Roman Egypt such terms tended to be applied to Isis. Such texts do not deny the existence of other gods, but treat them as aspects of the supreme deity, a type of theology sometimes called Pseudodeism. Never heard that word. Oh. In the late Ptolemaic and Roman periods, many temples contained a creation myth that adapted long-standing ideas about creation to give the primary roles to local deities. At Philae, Isis is described as the creator in the same way that older texts speak of the work of the god Ptah, who was said to have designed the world with his intellect and sculpted into its being. Like him, Isis formed the cosmos through what her heart conceived and her hands created. Like other gods throughout Egyptian history, Isis had many forms in her individual cult centers, and each cult center emphasized different aspects of her character. Local Isis cults focused on the distinctive traits of their deity more than on her universality, whereas some Egyptian hymns to Isis treat other goddesses in cult centers from all across Egypt and the Mediterranean as manifestations of her. A text in Isis' temple at Dendera says, "In each nome it is she who is in every town, in every nome with her son Horus." Iconography in Egypt. In Egyptian art, Isis was most commonly depicted as a woman with the typical attributes of a goddess: a sheathed dress, a staff of papyrus in one hand, and an Ankh sign in the other. Her original headdress was the throne sign used in writing her name. She and Nephthys often appear together, particularly when mourning Osiris' death, supporting him on his throne or protecting the sarcophagi of the dead. In these situations, their arms are often flung across their faces in gesture of mourning, or outstretched around Osiris or the deceased as a sign of their protective role. They also appear as kites or as women with the wings of kites. Isis sometimes appeared in other animal forms as their sow, representing her maternal character, as a cow, particularly when linked with Apis, or as a scorpion. She also took the form of a tree or a woman emerging from a tree, sometimes offering food and water to deceased souls. The form alluded to the maternal nourishment she provided. This form alluded to the material. Beginning in the New Kingdom, thanks to the close links between Isis and Hathor, Isis took on the other goddesses' attributes, such as a sistrum rattle and a headdress of cow horns enclosing a sun disk. Sometimes both her headdresses were combined, so the throne glyph sat atop the sun disk. In the same era, she began to wear the insignia of a human queen, such as a vulture-shaped crown on her head. and the royal uraeus, or rearing cobra on her brow. Bro, you say, right? In Ptolemaic and Roman times, statues and figurines of Isis often showed her in a Greek sculptural style, with attributes taken from Egyptian and Greek tradition. The Tiet symbol, a looped shape similar to the Ankh, was seen as Isis' particular emblem at least as early as the New Kingdom, though it existed long before. It was often made of the red jasper and likened to Isis' blood. Used as a funerary amulet, it was said to confer her protection on the wearer. Worship in Egypt and Nubia. Despite her significance in the Osiris myth, Isis was originally a minor deity in the ideology surrounding the living king. She played only a small role, for instance, in the dramatic Ramesseum papyrus, the script for coronation rituals performed for the accession of Senusret I, or what does it mean, in the Middle Kingdom. Her importance grew during the New Kingdom, where she was increasingly connected with Hathor and the human queen. The early first millennium BCE saw an increased emphasis on the family triad of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and an explosive growth in Isis's popularity. In the 4th century BCE, Nectanebo I of the 30th dynasty claimed Isis as his patron deity, tying her still more closely to political power. The kingdom of Kush, which ruled Nubia from the 8th century BCE to the 4th century CE, not BCE, CE, 4th century CE, absorbed and adapted the Egyptian ideology surrounding kingship. It equated Isis with the Kandake, the queen or queen mother of the Kushite king. The Ptolemaic Greek kings who ruled Egypt as pharaohs from 305 to 30 BCE developed an ideology that linked them with both Egyptian and Greek gods to strengthen their claim to the throne in the eyes of their Greek and Egyptian subjects. For centuries before, Greek colonists and visitors to Egypt had drawn parallels between Egyptian deities and their own in a process known as interpretatio Graeca. You can almost understand what that means in all languages, I guess now. Herodotus, a Greek who wrote about Egypt in the 5th century BCE, specifically equated Isis with Demeter. I never heard that. Whose mythical search for her daughter Persephone, I can understand that, resemble Isis' search for Osiris. Demeter was one of the few Greek deities to be widely adopted by Egyptians in Ptolemaic times. So the similarity between her and Isis provided a link between the two cultures. In other cases, Isis was linked with Aphrodite through the sexual aspects of her character. Building on these traditions, the two Ptolemies promoted the cult of the new god Serapis, who combined aspects of Osiris and Apis with those of Greek gods like Zeus and Dionysus. I can't say. Isis, portrayed in a Hellenized form, was regarded as the consort of Serapis as well as of Osiris. Ptolemy II and his sister and wife Arsinoe II developed a ruler cult around themselves, so that they were worshipped in the same temples as Serapis and Isis, and Arsinoe was likened to both Isis and Aphrodite. Some later Ptolemaic queens identify themselves still more closely with Isis. Cleopatra III in the 2nd century BCE used Isis's name in place of her own in inscriptions, and Cleopatra the Seventh, the last ruler of Egypt before it was annexed by Rome, used the epithet the new Isis. Down to the end of the New Kingdom, Isis's cult was closely tied to those of male deities such as Osiris, Min, or Amun. She was commonly worshipped alongside them as their mother or consort, and she was especially widely worshipped as the mother of various local forms of Horus. Nevertheless, she had her own independent priesthoods at some sites, and at least one temple of her own at Osiris's cult center of Abydos during the late New Kingdom. Still, it's called like Osiris's cult center anyway. Yeah. The first known major temples to Isis were the Ision at Beit el-Hagar in northern Egypt and Philae in the far south. Both began construction during the 30th dynasty and were completed or enlarged by Ptolemaic kings. Thanks to Isis's widespread fame, Philae drew pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. Many other temples of Isis sprang up in Ptolemaic times, ranging from Alexandria and Canopus on the Mediterranean coast to Egypt's frontier with Nubia. However, I guess I pronounce many things wrong here, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's still a series of temples of Isis stood in that region, stretching from Philae south to Maraka, and were sites of worship for both Egyptians and various Nubian peoples. The Nubians of Kush built their own temples to Isis at sites as far south as Wad Banaka, including one in their capital, Meroe. The most frequent temple rite for any deity was the daily offering ritual, in which the deity cult image would be clothed and given food. In Roman times, temples to Isis in Egypt could be built either in Egyptian style, in which the cult image of the deity and the daily offerings rites were performed by priests out of public view, and in a Greco-Roman style, in which the cult image was freely visible to the public. Yet the Greek and Egyptian culture were highly intermingled by this time, and there may have been no ethnic separation between Isis's worshippers. The same people may have prayed to Isis outside Egyptian-style temples and in front of her statue inside Greek-style temples. Temples also celebrated many festivals in the course of the year, some nationwide and some very local. An elaborate series of rites were performed all across Egypt for Osiris during the month of Khoiak, and Isis and Nephthys were prominent in these rites at least as early as the New Kingdom. In Ptolemaic times, 2 women acted out the roles of Isis and Nephthys during Khoiak, singing or chanting in mourning for their dead brother. Their chants are preserved in the festival songs of Isis and Nephthys and lamentations of Isis and Nephthys. Eventually, Isis developed her own festivals in addition to those of Khoiak. In Roman times, Egyptians across the country celebrated her birthday, the Amesisia, by carrying the local cult statue of Isis through their fields, probably celebrating her powers of fertility. The priests of Philae held a festival every 10 days when the cult statue of Isis visited the neighboring island of Big, which was said to be Osiris's place of burial, and the priests performed funerary rites for him. The cult statue also visited the neighboring temples to the south, even during the last centuries of activity at Philae, when those temples were run by Nubian peoples outside Roman rule. Christianity became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, including Egypt, during the 4th and 5th centuries CE. Egyptian temple cults died out gradually and at various times. From a combination of lack of funds and Christian hostility, Isis's temple at Philae, supported by its Nubian worshippers, still had an organized priesthood and regular festivals until at least the mid-5th century CE, making it the last fully functioning temple in Egypt. In many spells in the pyramid text, Isis and Nephthys help the deceased pharaoh reach the afterlife. In the coffin text from the Middle Kingdom, Isis appears still more frequently, though in these texts Osiris is credited with reviving the dead more often than she is. New Kingdom sources such as the Book of the Dead describe Isis as protecting deceased souls as they face the dangers of the Duat. They also describe Isis as a member of the divine councils that judge souls' moral righteousness before admitting them into the afterlife, and she appears in vignettes standing beside Osiris as he presides over this tribunal. Isis and Nephthys took part in funeral ceremonies where two wailing women, much like those in the festival of Abydos, mourned the deceased as the two goddesses mourned Osiris. From then on, Isis was frequently shown or alluded to any funerary equipment on sarcophagi and canopic chests as one of the four goddesses who protected the four sons of Horus. In tomb art, offering her enlivening milk to the dead, and in the Chiet amulets that were often placed on mummies to ensure that Isis's power would shield them from harm. Late funerary texts prominently featured her mourning for Osiris, and one such text, one of the books of breathing, was said to have been written by her for Osiris's benefit. In Nubian funerary religion, Isis was regarded as even more significant than her husband because she was the active partner, while he only passively received the offerings she made to sustain him in the afterlife. Unlike many Egyptian deities, Isis was rarely addressed in prayers or invoked in personal names before the end of the New Kingdom. From the late period on, she became one of the deities most commonly mentioned in the sources, which often refer to her kindly character and her willingness to answer those who call upon her for help. Hundreds of thousands of amulets and votive statues of Isis nourishing Horus were made during the first millennium BCE, and in Roman times she was among the deities most commonly represented in household religious art such as figurines and panel paintings. Isis was prominent in magical texts from the Middle Kingdom onward. The dangers Horus faced in childhood are a frequent theme in magical healing spells, in which Isis's efforts to heal him are extended to cure any patient. In many of these spells, Isis forces Ra to help Horus by declaring that she will stop the sun in its course through the sky unless her son is cured. Other spells equated pregnant women with Isis to ensure they would deliver the children successfully. Egyptian magic began to incorporate Christian concepts as Christianity was established in Egypt, but Egyptian and Greek gods continued to appear in spells long after their temple worship had ceased. Spells that may date to the 6th, 7th, or 8th century CE invoke the name of Isis alongside Christian figures. Alexander the Great's conquests in the late 4th century BCE led to the creation of Hellenistic kingdoms around the Mediterranean and Near East, including Ptolemaic Egypt, and put Greek religion in close contact with the native religions in those kingdoms. The resulting diffusion of cultures allowed many religious traditions to spread across the Hellenistic world in the last 3 centuries of BCE, Before that time, cults tied to a particular city or nation had been the norm across the ancient world. The new mobile cults, which included those of Isis and Serapis, adapted themselves to fit in many regions and appealed to people from a variety of cultures. Spread by merchants and other Mediterranean travelers, the cults of Isis and Serapis were established in Greek port cities at the end of the 4th century BCE and expanded throughout Greece and Asia Minor during the 3rd and 2nd centuries. The Greek island of Delos was an early cult center for both deities, and its status as a trading center made it a springboard for the Egyptian cults to diffuse into Italy. Isis and Serapis were also worshipped at scattered sites in the Seleucid Empire, the Hellenistic kingdom in the Middle East, as far east as Iran, though they disappeared from the region as the Seleucids lost their eastern territory to Parthia. Greek regarded Egyptian religion as exotic and sometimes bizarre, yet full of ancient wisdom. Like other cults from the eastern regions of the Mediterranean, the cult of Isis attracted Greeks and Romans by playing upon its exotic origins, but the form it took after reaching Greece was heavily Hellenized. Much of the Hellenization was influenced from the worship of Demeter. I think you say that in a different way, Demeter or something, with whom Isis was increasingly closely equated. Isis's cult reached Italy and the Roman sphere of influence at some point in the 2nd century BCE. It was one of many cults that were introduced to Rome as the Roman territory expanded in the last centuries BCE. Authorities in the Republic tried to define which cults were acceptable and which were not, as a way of defining Roman culture and identity amid the cultural changes brought on by Rome's expansion. Is this not going on all the time? In Isis's case, shrines and altars to her were set up in the Capitoline Hill at the heart of the city by private persons in the early 1st century BCE. The Roman Senate destroyed these shrines in a series of actions in the 50s and 40s BCE, treating their unsanctioned presence in the center of the city as a possible threat to peace among the gods, or to its own religious authority during the crisis of the Roman Republic. Nevertheless, Isis's cult was not outright banned from the city. Egyptian cults faced further hostility during the final war of the Roman Republic, 32 to 30 BCE, when Rome, led by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, fought Ptolemaic Egypt under Cleopatra VII. After Octavian's victory, he banned shrines to Isis and Serapis within the Pomerium, the city's innermost sacred boundary, but allowed them in part of the city outside the Pomerium, thus marking Egyptian deities as non-Roman but acceptable to Rome. Despite being temporarily expelled from Rome during the reign of Tiberius 14 to 37 CE, the Egyptian cults gradually became an accepted part of the Roman religious landscape. The Flavian emperors in the late 1st century CE treated Serapis and Isis as patrons of their rule in much the same manner as traditional Roman gods such as Jupiter and Minerva. Even as it was being integrated into Roman culture, Isis's worship developed new features that emphasized its Egyptian background, including a greater emphasis on Osiris than was present in the Hellenistic times. The cults also expanded into Rome's western provinces, beginning along the Mediterranean coasts in early imperial times. At their peak in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries CE, Isis and Serapis were worshipped in most towns across the Western Empire. though without much presence in the countryside. Their temples were found from Petra and Palmyra in the Arabian and Syrian provinces to Italica in Spain and Londinium in Britain. By this time they were regarded as protectors of the emperor and the well-being of society, on a comparable footing with native Roman gods. The form that Isis took among Greeks and Romans combined her Egyptian traits with Greek-Roman ideas. Her cult, like others in the Greco-Roman world, had no firm dogma, and its beliefs and practices may have stayed only loosely similar as it diffused across the region and evolved over time. Greek aretologies that praise Isis provide much of the information about these beliefs. Parts of these aretologies closely resemble ideas in late Egyptian hymns like those of Philae, while other elements are thoroughly Greek. Other information comes from Plutarch, 46-120 CE, whose book on Isis and Osiris interprets the Egyptian gods based on his Middle Platonist philosophy, and several works of Greek and Latin literature that refer to Isis worship, especially a novel by Apuleius, about 125 to 180 CE, known as Metamorphosis or the Golden Ass. I'm sorry, which ends by describing how the man character had a vision of the goddess and becomes her devotee. I'm tired now. It's a lot to read. Much of Isis's character in Greco-Roman belief was rooted in her roles as a wife and mother in the Osiris myth. Aretologists call her the inventor of marriage and parenthood. She was invoked to protect women in childbirth, and in ancient Greek novels such as the Ephesian Tale, to protect their virginity. Some ancient texts suggested she was the patroness of women in general. Her cult may have served to promote women's autonomy in a limited way, with Isis's power and authority serving as a prototype, but in myth she was devoted to and never fully independent of her husband and son. The aretologies show ambiguous attitudes towards women's independence. One says Isis made women equal to men, whereas another says she made women subordinate to their husbands. Isis was often characterized as a moon goddess, paralleling the solar characteristics of Serapis. She was also seen as a cosmic goddess more generally. Various texts claim she organized the behavior of the sun, moon, and stars, governing time and the seasons, which in turn guarantee the fertility of the earth. These texts also credit her with inventing agriculture, establishing laws, and devising or promoting other elements of human society. This idea derives from the older Greek traditions about the role of various Greek gods and culture heroes, including Demeter, in establishing civilization. She also oversaw seas and harbors. Sailors left inscriptions calling upon her to ensure the safety and good fortune of their voyages. In this role she was called Isis Pelagia, Isis of the sea, or Isis Paria, referring to the sail or the island of Paros, site of the lighthouse of Alexandria. This form of Isis, which emerged in Hellenistic times, may have been inspired by Egyptian images of Isis in a bark, as well as by Greek gods who protected seafaring, such as Aphrodite. Isis Pelagia developed an added significance in Rome. Rome's food supply was dependent on grains shipments from its provinces, especially Egypt. Isis therefore guaranteed fertile harvests and protected the ships that carried the resulting food across the seas, and thus ensured the well-being of the Roman Empire as a whole. Her protection of the state was said to extend to Rome's armies, much as it was in Ptolemaic Egypt. And she was sometimes called Isis Invicta, unconquered Isis. Her roles were so numerous that she came to be called Myrionymus, one with countless names, and Panthea, all goddess. Both Plutarch and later philosophers Proclus mentioned a veiled statue of the Egyptian goddess Neith that they conflated with Isis, citing it as an example of her universality and enigmatic wisdom. It bore the words, "I am all that has been and is and will be, and no mortal has ever lifted my mantle." Isis was also said to benefit her followers in the afterlife, which was not much emphasized in Greek and Roman religion. The golden ass and several inscriptions left by worshippers of Isis suggest that many of her followers thought she would guarantee them a better afterlife in return for their devotion, although they characterized it in different ways, including that they would benefit from Osiris's enlivening water or sail to the Fortunate Isles of Greek traditions. As in Egypt, Isis was said to have power over fate, which in traditional Greek religion was a power not even the gods could defy. Valentino Gasparini says that this control over destiny binds together Isis's disparate traits. She governs the cosmos, yet she also relieves people of their comparatively trivial misfortunes, and her influence extends into the realm of death, which is individual and universal at the same time. More than a dozen Egyptian gods were worshipped outside Egypt in Hellenistic and Roman times in a series of interrelated cults, though many were fairly minor. Of the most important of these deities, Serapis was closely connected with Isis and often appeared with her in art, but Osiris remained central to her myth and prominent in her rituals. Temples to Isis and Serapis sometimes stood next to each other, but it was rare for a single temple to be dedicated to both. Osiris, as a dead deity, seemed strange to Greeks and played only a minor role in Egyptian cults in Hellenistic times. In Roman times, he became like Dionysus, a symbol of a joyous afterlife, and the Isis cult increasingly focused on him. Horus, often under the name Harpocrates, also appeared in Isis's temple as her son by Osiris or Serapis. He absorbed traits from Greek gods like Apollo and Eros and served as a god of the sun and of crops. Another member of the group was Anubis, who was linked to the Greek god Hermes in the Hellenized form Hermanubis. I never heard that connection, actually. Strangely, I probably heard it but forgot. I knew there was a connection, but I never heard Hermanubis. Isis was also sometimes said to have learned her wisdom from or even to be the daughter of Thoth or Tehuti, the Egyptian god of writing and knowledge, who was known in the Greco-Roman world as Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus. I can't say it. Hermes Trismegistus. It's an extra S there. The 3 times great, it means. Also the emerald tablets, it's written by him, it says. And they didn't. Isis also had an extensive network of connections with the Greek and Roman deities. She was not fully integrated into the Greek pantheon, but she was often at different times equated with a variety of Greek mythological figures, including Demeter, Aphrodite, or Lo, a human woman who was turned into a cow and chased by the goddess Hera from Greece to Egypt. Oh, really? Oh, surprising. Isis's relationship with women was influenced by her frequent equation with Artemis, who had a dual role as a virgin goddess and a promoter of fertility. Because of Isis's power over fate, she was linked with Greek and Roman personifications of fortune, Tyche, and Fortuna. In occasion, Isis was linked with goddesses from cultures other than Greek and Roman. At Byblos in Phoenicia in the 2nd millennium BCE, Hathor had been worshipped as a form of the local goddess Balat Gebal. Isis gradually replaced Hathor there in the course of the 1st millennium BCE. In Noricum in Central Europe, Isis was synchronized with the local tutelary deity Norea, and at Petra she may have been linked with the Arab goddess Al-Uzza. The Roman author Tacitus said Isis was worshipped by the Suebi, Germanic people living outside the empire, but he may have mistaken a Germanic goddess for Isis because, like her, the goddess was symbolized by a ship. Many of the aretologies include long lists of goddesses from a variety of Mediterranean cultures with whom Isis was linked. These texts treat all the deities they list as forms of Isis, suggesting that in the eyes of the authors she was the one goddess for the entire civilized world. In the Roman religious world, many deities were referred to as one or unique in religious texts like these. At the same time, Hellenistic philosophers frequently saw the unifying abstract principle of the cosmos as divine. Many of them reinterpreted traditional religions to fit their concept of this highest being, as Plutarch did with Isis and Osiris. Aretologies, as well as the Golden Ass, treat Isis in summodeistic terms as the sum of a multitude of other deities. In the Golden Ass, Isis says, "My one person manifests the aspects of all the gods and goddesses, and that she is worshipped by all the world under different forms, with various rites and by manifold names, although the Egyptians and Nubians used her true name Isis." But when she lists the forms in which various Mediterranean peoples worship her, she mentions only female deities. Greco-Roman deities were firmly divided by gender, thus limiting how universal Isis could truly be. One aretology avoids this problem by calling Isis and Serapis, who was often said to subsume many male gods, the two unique deities. Similarly, both Plutarch and Apuleius limit Isis's importance by treating her as ultimately subordinate to Osiris. The claim that she was unique was meant to emphasize her greatness more than to make a precise theological statement. Oh, there's more to read here. I'm a little bit tired, and also I don't know how much. I will continue anyways. How much I can upload? Yeah, we will see. Images of Isis made outside Egypt were Hellenistic in style, like many of the images of her made in Egypt in Hellenistic and Roman times. The attributes she bore varied widely. She sometimes wore the Hathoric cow horn headdress, but Greeks and Romans reduced its size and often interpreted it as the crescent moon. She could also wear headdresses incorporating leaves, flowers, or ears of grain. Other common traits included corkscrew locks of hair and an elaborate mantle tied in a large knot over the breasts, which originated in ordinary Egyptian clothing but was treated as a symbol of the goddess outside Egypt. In her hands she could carry a ureus or a sistrum, both taken from the Egyptian iconography or a situla, a vessel used for libations of water or milk that were performed in Isis's cult. As Isis Fortuna or Isis Tyche, she held a rudder representing the control of fate. In her right hand, a cornucopia standing for abundance, in her left. As Isis Paria, she wore a cloak that billowed behind her like a sail. And as Isis Lactans, she nursed her child, Harpocrates. The diverse imagery sprang from her various roles. As Robert Stephen Bianchi says, Isis could represent anything to anyone and could be represented in any way imaginable. Okay. Wow. Should I really not pause here? I read just a little bit more before I come to worshipping Greek and Roman culture. Where was I now? I don't know. Like most cults of the time, the Isis cult did not require its devotees to worship Isis exclusively, and their level of commitment probably varied greatly. Some devotees of Isis served as priests in a variety of cults and underwent several initiations dedicated to different gods. Nevertheless, many emphasized their strong devotion to her, and some considered her the focus of their lives. They were among the very few religious groups in the Greco-Roman world to have a distinctive name for themselves, loosely equivalent to Jew or Christian, that might indicate they define themselves by their religious affiliation. However, the word Isiacus or Isaac were rarely used. Isaacs were a small proportion of the Roman Empire's population, but they came from every level of society, from slaves and freedmen to high officials and members of the imperial family. Ancient accounts imply that Isis was popular with lower social classes, providing a possible reason why authorities in the Roman Republic, troubled by struggles between classes, regarded her cult with suspicion. Women were more strongly represented in the Isis cult than in most Greco-Roman cults, and in imperial times they could serve as priestesses in many of the same positions in the hierarchy as the male counterparts. In Isaic inscriptions, women made up much less than half of the cult's adherents and are rare among the higher ranks of priests. But because women are underrepresented in Roman inscriptions, their participation may have been greater than is recorded. Several Roman writers accused Isis' cult of encouraging promiscuity among women. Jamie Alvar suggests that the cult attracted male suspicion simply because it gave women a venue to act outside her husband's control. Priests of Isis were known for their distinctive shaven heads and white linen clothes, both characteristics drawn from Egyptian priesthoods and their requirements of ritual purity. A temple of Isis could include several ranks of priests, as well as various cultic associations and specialized duties for lay devotees. There is no evidence of a hierarchy overseeing multiple temples, and each temple may well have functioned independently of the others. Oh, I need to pause now. Coming back with the rest in next video. Bye for now.